Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Slaying the Monster, Success Stories in Delivering Learning ROI, produced by Brandon Hall Group and sponsored by Litmos. Happy to have everybody here, very excited to talk about learning measurement and really delivering success stories on what's working. Before we get started with the content, we always have some preliminaries. First, I want to thank our webinar sponsor, Litmos, phenomenal partner with Brandon Hall Group. Litmos develops e-learning solutions for top-performing companies. An established leader in the market since 2007, Litmos offers the world's easiest-to-use LMS and a comprehensive learning content library. Thousands of companies trust the solutions to create, curate, and connect learning content to employees, customers, and partners. The solutions are used by more than 30 million people in 150 countries across 35 languages. For those of you who aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we're a human capital management research and advisory firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. We have 6 practice areas, including learning and development, talent management, and leadership development. Quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. Visit certification.brandonhall.com to learn more about how you can earn that designation. Your participation in Brandon Hall Group's research surveys is one of the most crucial components of our insights and thought leadership. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see any topics that you can take a survey for, greatly appreciated. As you can see, we have 3 open surveys right now on talent acquisition, future-ready HR, and enabling elite performance. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always just visit brandonhall.com. All participants receive a piece of complimentary research once the results are analyzed. Finally, a few logistics. To ask questions, please use the questions panel on the control bar. We'll leave time at the end for questions. The webinar is being recorded, so we'll share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in about 24 hours, probably less. If you'd like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. The chat is open today, and we really hope you'll share your thoughts and experiences as we go along in the webinar today. Give us feedback, perspective, maybe share your own experiences of some of the maybe learning measurement challenges or experiences that you've had. Just join in whatever way you feel comfortable. I would love to just have you share your thoughts as you go. We might share some with them, share some of the thoughts as we go, or save them for the end. Or at the very least, just simply pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining us from today. So let's get started. And we'll start, as we often do in Brandon Hall Group webinars, with some research and kind of tell you where we are with learning measurement. For as long as I've been an analyst in the corporate learning space, which is almost 15 years now, measuring the impact of learning has been kind of the Achilles heel of companies big and small. Few of our clients refer to learning as our unslayable monster, which is the inspiration for our webinar title today. There's really less tolerance these days, I think, for falling short in establishing the business impact to learning. Data and analytics are now really ubiquitous in almost every aspect of how business is promoted, or performed rather. So therefore, the failure to link learning to performance metrics, both individually and organizationally, might show a lack of maturity in the learning function. And that limits learning's value to the business at a time when really learning should be excelling, because organizations need to upskill and reskill employees and understand the proficiency of their workforce. So the focus of learning teams has long been on learning effectiveness, kind of learning for its own sake. Learning organizations really need to start, and more organizations are talking to us about this, start from the mindset of business outcomes, not learning outcomes or learning objectives, but business outcomes. We like to say that learning leaders need to think more like a CEO in the way they approach learning measurement and management and tie it to business outcomes. So this is a slide from our latest learning measurement study conducted earlier this year, and we asked why you measure learning. And the most frequent answer was 54% of organizations said they measure learning to validate the effectiveness. But what does that mean, right? Measuring effectiveness usually amounts in most organizations to asking the learner whether the learning was effective, or whether they were satisfied, or if they found it, you know, to their liking. But that's not really proof. It's just opinion. And effectiveness often refers to knowledge transfer and comprehension, not proficiency in applying knowledge and newly learned skills to their work. So it's not that meaningful. And of course, we've been saying this for a long time at Brandon Hall Group, but it's still the most frequent answer. So we still have a ways to go to move the needle. Only a little more than 1/3 of organizations, if you look at the middle bar, about 35%, use learning measurement to validate return on investment, sometimes also referred to, or also return on value, return on expectations, which Jen is going to talk about in a couple minutes. And then 30% are still just say they're measuring learning just to validate L&D budget requests and future learning investments. But if you're only able to tell people that, yes, the learners liked it, that's not a reason to give you more money. In fact, it may be a reason to give you less money. And so we're finding that learning budgets are generally flat or decreasing by a couple of percentage points, when really they should be going up because of all the needs that organizations have. So moving on, one of the, this slide talks about proficiency in measurement. And so for those organizations that actually take the time to measure learning's impact on the organization, they're still in a growth mode, right? They're still trying to get the hang of it. So for example, only 40% of respondents said they were proficient or highly proficient at identifying performance outcomes prior to designing or delivering learning content. So the idea is to begin with the business outcome at the end. This is where we want to end up, and then working backwards. 40% of organizations say they're proficient in that. That's not bad, but obviously we need to get a lot better as an industry to really deliver the impact that we all want. From there, there's a big drop off in proficiency when it comes to collecting data, manually pulling data from other business systems, or using other business systems to automatically pull data. So the proficiency level in these areas just remains low. Another statistic that's kind of troubling to me is that almost two thirds of organizations, 64%, responding to our research, told us they never or only sporadically attempt to determine the organizational impact of specific learning modalities. So how well is ILT working versus e-learning versus immersive learning versus cohort-based learning? It's important to understand what's most effective in certain situations, certain types of learning, so you can adjust, make changes, but most people still aren't doing that. And there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. Organizations have a lot of challenges. They're up against a lot of things. Budget is often cited, lack of staff, lack of technology. There's a lot of reasons, and many of them are good reasons, but the learning measurement really, in my mind, as an analyst and somebody who gives advice to organizations every day, is something that really should be top of mind, and probably the biggest objective you have as you head into the new year. So these are the challenges our research showed. Before I turn it over to Jen, we'd like to get a sense of what you think your biggest challenges are. So we want to launch a quick poll. We're giving you 5 choices, and some of these challenges, you may have many of these challenges or multiple challenges. We'd like you to try to pick one to identify as the biggest challenge. So number 1 would be there's no integration between the LMS and other systems. Or B, insufficient pre-built LMS reporting options. Or C, lack of budget staff to support measurement and analysis. D, lack of depth and feedback mechanisms. So for instance, over-reliance on smile sheet surveys. Or E, data discrepancies due to manual reporting processes. So we'll give you
important, Claude.
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I think these are really good options, but I think it's important to say these are probably 5 out of a million, just because everybody's looking at things differently. I think some of the things that stand out to me thinking about the data that you shared, that I think there's a lot that people don't know. And when they're
Yep.
thinking about building the systems and things like that, when I look at these, I can tell you, lack of budget and staff to support the analysis. When you are first thinking about it, you're probably not thinking about measuring it from the back end. So I really like the perspective of thinking about it from a CEO or an outcome and kind of working backwards, because I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, because I think sometimes and I don't know if you find this, Jen, when you're talking to people, I think they make learning measurements sometimes more complicated than it really is. I mean, there is a technique to it. There's things you need to know. But if you look at it at that level, where are we? Where do we want to be? What are the business outcomes we want? And then how do we get there? And how do we evaluate that? It's not as complicated as people make it out.
Well, if we think about slaying monsters, we're always thinking about the dragon in the tower. We're not thinking about once we get past all of the path and the journey to get there, it's really not that hard to slay the dragon.
Agreed. So here is the answers you've given us to the question, and thanks for taking the time to do it. Fairly evenly spread. So 27% say it's a lack of budget on staff, and that was the number one answer in our research. This percentage is a little lower, but it's still the number one challenge, followed by no integration between LMS and other systems, followed closely there by lack of depth and feedback mechanisms, so really not maybe asking the right questions, and then a little fewer people on reporting options and data discrepancies. So thank you for that. That helps us understand where you all are. And now, before we turn it over to Jen, just one more thing. I want to leave you with some good news and some good reasons to keep really working hard on slaying that learning measurement monster. So 2 years ago, we asked organizations how proficient they were in measuring the impact of learning overall. And 16% told us that they were proficient or extremely proficient. Only 16%. This year, we asked the same question, and 27% of organizations responding said they were proficient. Now, the percentage is still pretty low, of course, but it does represent a 69% increase over 2 years. So progress is being made. People are working at it. And so we hope to give you some tips and some success stories to use as an incentive to keep working at it. So when we ask people the benefits of improving their learning measurement, the number one answer is we're now viewed as more of a strategic partner in the organization. 59% people told us that. 52% said we're better able to improve our learning initiatives after initial results. 44%, we can more easily define the success or failure of our learning initiatives, which is very important. I won't read all of them to you, but you can see here that there's a lot of benefits to trying to slay that monster, try to keep making progress. And we hope now to give you some more ammunition for that. So Jen, I'll turn it over to you to talk about how to measure L&D effectiveness.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things you need to think about when we're talking about this, and from a standpoint of kind of defeating the monster here. We have to think about the fact that previously LMS or learning systems or training has had a little bit of a negative connotation. And now we need to really think about bringing the value into the business for growing our employees and enhancing their experience, really investing in people long-term and making sure that they scale and grow with our business and that they're continuing to learn, creating that culture of learning. But when we want to do these things, I think you mentioned this, Claude, we have to be able to fund these things. A lot of our businesses, we have great ideas, but how do we make them come to fruition? We have to work through the budgeting and measurements. And a lot of time, as Claude said, you got to start with the outcome. What are you looking for? And you have to go backwards. So what I like to start with is, how am I going to measure my success? And then how do I need to be successful both with the business unit and funding, but also within the employees and the different departments and how we're going to use this. And so for me, I break that into two different measurements. One is ROI. So when we're looking for budget, we're thinking about business outcomes. So if I am investing in this learning, can I get, for me, CSMs, connected faster to customers? Can I get support agents trained into the phones faster? Can I get salespeople through selling and connecting with potential prospects? And so if I'm looking at investments such as efficiency and, time to train and, onboarding to live and functioning, that's what I'm really looking for, is the investment part of it on the business. And that's how I'm going to have the conversation with the CFO to say, here's what I'd like to do. Here are the outcomes I expect. And this is the investment that I'm going to put together for that. The other part of that is the return on experience or engagement. And that's thinking about your learners and how they're going to grow and receive and adopt the learning culture that you're creating, the tools that you're using. We, historically, way back in the day, we won't age ourselves here, but Claude, I don't know if you remember, but when people would say LMS, people would shy away, and you would think in your mind, if I purchase an LMS, it's going to be a year to implement and adopt because I'm just really going to have to push people to it. And now with the change of kind of the whole way that we look at the value of our employees and really wanting to lean into that, we want to help train people, grow people, create opportunities within our organizations to really enhance that education. We're not giving an education fund and saying, hey, go outside. We're saying, let's figure out what you're interested in. Let's figure out the skills that you need, not only in this role, but to grow. And let's create, I'm a customer leader, so I'm going to use the term journey. Let's create an education journey for you. Let's really invest in your growth and help you get where you need to go. And so when I think about, return on engagement experience, I'm looking, how can I take these amazing people in my organization and invest in their education and grow them to be long-term, assets or partners in our business. And, what I've really seen in that, and I've used LMS in all of my organizations, service, success, and support, is that just translates in multitudes to customer happiness, to customer satisfaction, because they're speaking to people who know what they're talking about. And they're talking to people, when you are educated and when you have some knowledge, you have a level of confidence and you feel a little bit more secure in your interaction. And that's huge today, I think. I talk a lot, Claude, so I'm going to take a pause and give you a moment to interject. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we do a lot of research lately on employee experience and employee engagement. And one of the things that we found is there is a really strong correlation, as you mentioned, between engagement or employee experience and customer satisfaction. But a big part of engagement and experience is learning. When we ask people, what are the things that drive your employee experience? Learning is always in the top 3. We ask it all the time. It's maybe not always right at the top of the list, but it's always in the top 3. So learning is a huge part of the employee experience and is a big correlation with customer satisfaction, which of course ties back to what we've been talking about, is the business outcomes, the business growth, the business success.
That's
So
right.
it's incredibly important.
That's right. I would say these are very much intertwined. And your return on engagement ties heavily into your return on investment. And you also see that operationally, your costs can decrease when you're really investing and creating learning for the skills that you need in your business. And also it translates externally to customers, where you also have the option to train your customers on, are you releasing new products? Are you doing things like that? So there's really so many avenues. At Litmus, we like to say we're lifetime learners, and we like to bring that into all the things that we do. So these are the two things that I think about when I'm measuring and when I'm thinking about that. But I'm really I like to talk about practical use cases. And so we have some case studies and real examples that I'd like to talk through. But first, I want to talk about one of the many models kind of evaluation that you can look at when you're thinking about your learners. Kirkpatrick, I apologize, I always struggle with these words sometimes, is one of the foundations. It was created in 1950. A lot of people in the learning space are familiar with it. However, when I, years and years ago, we won't age me, but like a century ago, leaned into trying to bring learning into my organization and really looking at how would I measure that, how would I evaluate that, I started digging into what are methodologies for adult learning that make the most sense. There's Kirkpatrick, there's Knowles, Bandura, Zimmerman. There's a couple of different types. Some are more social, some are more self-regulated. What I like about Kirkpatrick is I feel like it's very fluid and it kind of moves with you. Did they like it? Let me check and see, was it received well? Did it have good content? What did they learn from it? Because there's one thing, I can take a training and I loved it and it was great anecdotes and good video and quality, but what did I take away from it? Did I learn? You can do that with skill checks, knowledge checks in your learning, even surveys after if you want to. And then behavior. Are you taking what you learned and applying it? For me, one of the biggest things that I look in my organization is we're investing a lot of time in your training, but am I seeing that in the business? Am I seeing it translate through? And for me, that's application of skill. And that's what I'm looking for once we invest in some of the training. And then what impact did it have on an organization? And for my specific organization, I will tell you that we did just some soft skills with the work culture kind of changing during the pandemic and things like that. Our soft skills and our evolution about how we communicate changed a little bit. And so we've done a lot of training about, speaking with customers when it's meaningful for them, not just chasing customers just because you need to check a box and some things like that. And we've had such a great reaction from our customers and saying that I appreciate not asking me to sit in a meeting when there's no content for me, or I appreciate asking me how I like to communicate. And so that's how I can see, did our learners like it? They did. Did they take something away from it? Are they applying it in the business? And have we had a response from the customer that's acknowledged that our behaviors changed? And in that specific example, it has, which has been really, really great for us. So kind of using this evaluation model and thinking about how we're looking at it, we can talk through some of the use cases where I kind of positioned it as like, what were they trying to solve for? There's challenge. And then how did they use the LMS kind of to solution and get where they want it to be?
Yeah, just a couple things. So first of all, what we're talking about here is level 4 measurement, and only in our we look at this model in our research every year, and only about 22% of organizations are even trying to measure at level 4. So that gives you an idea of where we need to go. We got a question that Jen, maybe we could tackle now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it kind of ties into what we're talking about, and it's how do you tie more than general correlations on impacts like customer satisfaction, support cases, confidence, churn, etc.
So that's a really good question,
Yep.
because we're talking different parts of business here. So for CSAT specifically, one of the things that I'll use an example because I think it comes across multiple businesses is the way in which we communicate with customers inside a case, on a call, or even if it's in a chat. And when we did some very specific communication training, we tracked the CSAT of the cohort that went through that training. We didn't do the entire organization all at once. We did one cohort, and then we tracked that so that we could see if their CSAT went up or down on a very specific question that asked about the communication with their support representative. What we saw was an 8% increase in a positive reaction to the communication, because what we had asked agents to do in talking with our customers is think about it not just in the fact that we resolve the issue, but kind of problem solution. Hey, Mr. Customer, you had this issue. Here's what we did to resolve it. This, how we considered our resolution or kind of defined that and kind of wrapped it up for them at the closure of case. And that's just been an absolute great reaction from customers in CSAT. Now, in support cases, what we're trying to do is we look at the training of our customers and our onboarding, and we're measuring, the reaction to the training. So again, did they like the training? Do they feel like they learned something? Then we're looking at the users' steps in our software to say, are they applying the things that we've learned them? So we're using some of our product data to tie in and say, okay, we've taught them to do this. Are they doing it in the product? And we're tying that back. I think in confidence, that's a little bit harder for us to measure because it's uh, qualitative, but we're doing some ENPS here in the next couple months. And so I'm hoping that maybe we'll, some of the questions we have, we'll be asking about the investment and the training in them. And so that would probably be the way that I tie that to confidence. And I think everything that we do for anyone that's engaging with the customer is an investment in churn prevention. And so, making sure CSMs feel comfortable in negotiation conversation, strategic conversation, confident in product, and are able to engage with customers, support people, are knowledgeable, our service people, our training folks can do that. I think anything that we do to invest in their knowledge and increase their confidence is something that what I would say it's an investment from churn from start to finish. That's a lot. So please let me know if I answered your question or if I just kind of went around the block with that.
Yeah, it's a great question though. And the bottom line is it's not, if you're looking for customer satisfaction, it's not, you don't actually measure, hey, do we improve customer satisfaction? It's specific metrics within that. And
That's
so
right.
you can get as granular or not granular as you want.
I see there's another question. It's related to Kirkpatrick. I'd love to answer it if I could real quick.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
So I do think that Thalmeyer has been critical of Kirkpatrick. I think a lot of folks are. I think as training evolves, some of the older models or kind of foundations are being reevaluated. But here's why I like Kirkpatrick and why we use it, because it's what I consider agile. I've identified a need. I've applied a solution. I'm gauging the reaction. I'm measuring if we've learned something and if we're applying it. And so for me, those 4 steps that kind of make it very simple: identify the need, apply a solution, check immediately how it's doing, see if it's applied, makes sense to a lot of what we're doing in my specific business. Like I said, there's a lot of different learning models out there,
Sure.
and there's even one that combines elements of all. I think there's a theory that that's mentioned on one of my slides later that kind of brings all that together. But this is really where you have to do research and kind of make the decision that works best for your business.
Right. And the reason we cite it quite often, even though it's always been a little bit controversial and maybe a little bit more so now, but we do research on the models that the people use, companies use every year. Kirkpatrick is always the most used. And this year, 59% of organizations said they used Kirkpatrick in one way or another. And I can't remember, because I don't have the slide in front of me, I don't remember the second model, the second most used model, but it was like half of that.
Yeah.
So that's why we tend to use it, but certainly you have to find a model that's going to work best for your particular business case.
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sometimes I think I'm talking to myself out into the ether, and so I love to have questions and know that we're talking about things that matter. Great. So here is where I've brought some actual examples. Saber's one of our customers, and they're really kind of prominent in travel. And one of the things that they've noticed with their sales team is that onboarding their sales folks was really taking a long time. They were having a hard time getting sales folks in and to what they consider like function. And when they were getting them functional, it was very chunky and it was disjointed, and that some of the salespeople were really responding to some of the modalities that they had and some weren't. Meaning one example of what they used to do is they had a PowerPoint, and you kind of went through all these PowerPoints and then you kind of answered some questions, and some people are really good with that and some people aren't. And so they were kind of missing some things there. And the way that they wanted to measure their success was obviously increased revenue. It's a sales organization. They want to grow their business, so customers, and they're looking to be operationally solid and not really spending money bringing everybody to one location for it not to be effective. And so when they came to us, one of the things were, it was time to task, right? And how quick can we make our team not only knowledgeable but successful in the field? And so What we were able to create for them was kind of an on-demand learning, e-learning course that was accessible no matter where you were. So you didn't have to worry about time zone challenges, travel. The training team had the ability now to create quality reports, and they were rating, was the trainer in the training effective? Some of their classes were recorded on demand. And then, were they learning through the course? There were skill checks. They would talk about an issue, they would give a couple examples, and then they would do a skill check to say, like, here's the application, or here's the process, here's the application, what are you taking away from it? And having the ability to really monitor some of the learners' paths in the courses, the attendance of the courses, the quality or success of the folks taking the courses was really key in helping them move forward, because they were able to pivot and make changes and enhance their training program on the fly. They didn't have to wait. They didn't have to go through a really big, cumbersome process, and they could move super fast, which in a sales organization, we know time is literally money. And so, they increased their revenue, I believe 44%, because they were able to improve their customer experiences. They had an increase in customers in 28% in 1 year, which for them was record breaking. And they were able to significantly reduce their spend in travel and some of the things that they were doing, because they didn't have to now hire people, do kind of a hiring pool, bring them all to one space and do some training. They could train on the fly as they go with folks. And so I think, for me, one of the most important takeaways is when the leader, of the organization comes back and says, listen, we were able to launch Litmus in a matter of days, not weeks, not months. It allowed us to go to market faster, and even faster than we'd anticipated when we made the plan. And so as they were leaning into it, and as they keep enhancing it, they keep picking up gains in more than just, the training aspect of it, but they're performing better as a sales organization. They've increased their customers. They've even evolved this and taken the training program throughout the business. Sales was the first organization. And so they've really taken this process and are now, cascading it across the business. So it's a really good example of an organization that needed to move fast, that needed to be able to facilitate multiple time zones, multiple regions, and still make sure that they had quality training with good content. And Litmus was able to help them do that very quickly.
So I think we have a question specifically to this, which is, how did you specifically tie the measures you're talking about of success to those modules, to the modules that you talked about?
Yeah, I think what they did is so we worked with their global sales enablement leader. What they did was they took the KPIs that they were measuring the sales individuals on from the beginning, and then they started that was kind of the benchmark. So we're here. And then they started applying and rolling out these training, and then following the performance of the individuals as they did that. And so internally, they had, I think, close rates for their sales individuals, time to close, time and stages. They also do a survey once a customer comes on board to talk about the experience. And I think they were getting some feedback there. And immediately it started becoming positive feedback. And obviously managing their P&L and seeing that, hey, we had this much allocated to training and travel, and now it's this, because they were able to cut out the training and invest that money in the LMS. How do they create? Let me read your question, make sure that we're answering it. Struggling to expand learners on non-compliant courses. Right. So a lot of the leaders in this organization tied this training into, I think they had quarterly goals that they had to do as a part of their compensation plan. And so I think the training was tied into that. I know from my organization, our training goals are tied to our objectives on a quarterly basis. So a fourth of the goals within my business are tied to learning progress, skill increase, and application in job. Meaning, if you're starting with, you're leveled at a skill 2, by the end of this quarter, we want you to be leveled at a skill 3, or things like that. That's very rudimentary, because there's a lot of soft skills that goes into it. We also do a lot internally with adoption with our customers and with our internal folks to promote the value of the learning system. So they started bringing some of their like sales stand-ups into the LMS and putting in performance reports into the LMS. And so the more that the leaders were coming into the LMS, the sales folks were following, and their adoption followed that as well. And they also created some different types of training for education within your role. If you wanted to have self-growth, if you're a salesperson and you wanted to eventually say move into another organization, they started putting things in there available to them, product knowledge. Are you interested in being a product owner? So they not only had their required, but they had the ability to self-select and enhance their skills and things that might be of interest to them.
Great. Should we move on to the next one?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So this is T-Tech, and I love them because they're a global experience company, and this speaks to my heart specifically, and my focus at Limis. I'm responsible for all of our customer-facing teams globally, and so they have call centers, and with call centers, you don't get to just take everybody off the phone and put them, as I'm sure everybody's aware, you just don't have the time to pull everybody off the phone. And so they had to think of a way to get the training to all of their agents in a timely manner, in an effective manner, and make it somewhat on demand and ad hoc so they could work with their skilling and the workflow coming into their call center. Their measures of success are kind of what we see in the support arena. It has high attrition. So they wanted to know, did people have an intent to stay? Did they see a future in the organization? Employee NPS and all, do they feel like the organization was investing in them and cared about them being there long term? And then voluntary attrition, were people leaving just because they could get another job somewhere else? And all of those really tie into engagement and investment of the organization and the employee. So what they were able to do is literally in a weekend, we all, teams kind of swarmed, and we defined what they wanted to train on, what was the most important, what their employees had been telling them they wanted to learn, and what the business metrics told them that they really needed to invest in. Call times were long. Were they actually solving the issue? Were we putting people on hold too long? Those types of things. And so we put together some learning paths that were very specific to that content. We pulled in some of the content that we have. We have a very large content library. So we were able to very quickly say, here, as being a support leader, way too many years, we won't define, but I was able to say, these are the courses that I would put in front of your agents today, and here's how you're going to measure effectiveness. If you see them being comfortable and answering questions and having the right tools in front of them, they're not going to put customers on hold for long periods of time because they're going to feel comfortable in front of that. If you are really investing in the art of communication and problem and solution and thinking about the outcome, the conversations go a little bit easier on the calls and things like that. They were able to, after the deployment of this in the first quarter, they were able to see that their employee NPS went up. And this NPS was annualized after multiple quarters, but they saw their first incremental increase after the first quarter. And then they saw a 22% increase in intent to stay in that same eNPS survey, where they were able to say, do you see yourself here in 2 years? And the employees overwhelmingly responded, I feel like I can learn and there's a path for me to stay, and I'm not just an agent on the phone that's replaceable. And their voluntary attrition went down, where previously it was very high and on a sharp incline, and they were able to tie that specifically back to the investment in training and their employees and making sure that they felt valued and invested in, and that the organization cared about their growth and career development. I see there's a couple questions. Claude, did you want me to take a look at those?
Yeah, I can address them here. Let's see, from Jessica, what makes ROI complicated is isolating the factor of training. How important is it to isolate training in our indicators? Is measuring organizational global success enough? So
here's where I'm going to tell you, I do not do it at a global level at first, because you do have to break it down to function. So for a sales organization, are you trying to get somebody working with prospects faster? Is there a process there? And what's your gain there? And then look at, so for me and for support, I'm looking, how long is it taking us to train an agent, not only to get to the phone, but to provide quality support and to actually be able to be comfortable working there. I think you have to look at the business units that you want to do the training for, and you have to find your business measurements or indications that align with your strategic goals to be able to justify the investment in that and wrap it all up in that capacity. I think if you kind of just do global success, it's not granular enough, and it's very easy to say, we can figure training out, we don't need that. And so you've got to tie it to the function specifically and the different parts of the business. And where I've been most successful is leaning into the roles or the functions that have direct impact on revenue, on retention, and on preventing folks from leaving us. I think those things have been really strong I guess points when I'm having these conversations.
Yeah, we often talk about start locally, then expand globally, and
That's right.
And so, yeah, that's definitely the way to go. And also, just whenever you're trying some sort of new measurement initiative, start with some sort of pilot. Start small, get a sense of what's working, what's not working, and then grow from there. Start small and then expand. We had another question here. We might as well tackle, since we're tackling most of them live. How would you position business outcomes, such as like improving sales performance by X amount, when you don't have access to the data? It's not easy to measure, or it's not easy to measure the data. How do you approach that? Yeah.
It's a really good question, because you don't know what you don't know until you don't, you know what I mean? Like you have no idea that that's there. There's a couple ways that I've kind of tackled this in the past. The good news is somebody somewhere has done this before. And so there's been a couple times where I've reached out to peers and kind of mentors and said, I need to invest in training in this organization, and I need to tie that to an expected increase in revenue. If I look at what we're doing today, the time it's taking, the cost it's taking, I can make some predictions on the time, but the effectiveness is the hard one. And so there's been a couple times where I've had to reach out to peers, do some research, and make a conservative assumption and say, if we invest here instead of there, I think I can make, a 3 to 5 increase in the first quarter, but we need to evaluate that as we go, and we need to measure it as we go. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's something that I've always found that I've had to get creative and kind of think outside the box. There's a lot of times where I've reached out to peers to say, have you done this? Have you gone through it? I've even gone to LinkedIn and kind of posed the question in some of the community groups to kind of crowdsource some information, because that's the one thing that, unless you have really solid data, unless you've done it before, unless you've got that, it's the hardest question to answer. And a little bit is going to be gut, and a little bit is going to be kind of doing some research and talking to folks who are doing this, who've gone through this before, to pull some of the information. It's not the best answer, but unfortunately, it's going to get you to the truest estimation.
So we got a couple more questions, but I think I'd like to just jump to the next example and then make sure we have time for that, and then we can come back to some other questions. How's that?
Okay, sounds good. So Service Max is one that has not only had a success story, but is definitely taking this and echoing it within their business. So they're a service provider, and they had a lot of trouble with growing the knowledge of their employees. They had folks who kind of were new and learning, and then they had folks that are tenured and kind of know the things, and it's great, but it's all in here. And so they were having trouble getting new people on board, and then getting documentation of other processes and things in place. And then, as your product evolves, your knowledge, your education, your training, all of that has to evolve with you. Training is always a living, breathing product. It's never a finished product, because your business is always evolving, you're changing, it has to scale with you. And so what we noticed was their customers were actually really engaged in the product, and they wanted to lean in more, but they didn't really have a way to say, hey, I'm certified, I can do these types of things. And so what we kind of came together and identified as number 1 and 2 is internally, we were going to create employee learning paths, or that journey to career development. And then that's okay. And then for the customers, a certification program. How can the customers have confidence and be well-versed in product and stay current with product as it evolves? And so on the learning path, we wanted to basically say, okay, I'm a support agent. As a support agent, I need to take soft skills. I need to have this product knowledge. I need to have the system knowledge. I need to have, these things to be successful and ready to hit the floor. And then once I hit a certain performance level, I need to keep growing in my journey so that I have a career path and I have development visible and in front of me. So I feel engaged. I want to stay. I feel invested in. And so that's what we worked on with that for the job functions that they identified. And we worked with them on some of them, and then they've taken that and evolved that since we did their implementation. And then externally, we wanted their customers to have a certification program so they felt really connected to the software, so they felt like they had their own experts within their organizations, and more kind of a sense of bringing customer close to product and helping them feel really connected. And so we created a certification program, and we started with some of the different types of roles that they wanted to identify, and then created kind of advanced levels. And so they can sell, or they can offer a training program to their customers that is self-driven. They can go in, they can log in, they can choose their journey, they can choose their path, and then they too can evolve with it. And so they had great gamification in their certification. They had the ability in their community to kind of bring people together. Some of their community experts were helping, newer customers, and it really brought customers together in a way that we all want our customers to be able to do that. And not only did they do this, these two, they've evolved beyond that to, partner certifications and, advanced level certifications. And for their employees, taking these learning paths and creating this whole network of career development within their organization that helps their employees say that, like, hey, you're not just a butt in a seat. You're somebody we're invested in. We want you to grow with us. We want you to learn, and we want you to become long-term and be a part of our organization as we grow. And so their 2 measurements for success were boosted buy-in, meaning were their employees engaged in the learning things that they put in front of them, and were they really leaning in to not only, again, take the courses that were necessary to their paths, but identifying the next level of journey and where they wanted to go. And then obviously they wanted to increase their revenue. They wanted to do some face-to-face trainings. They wanted to create different modalities for their customers, and they wanted to monetize that a little bit. And they were able to do that, which they'd never been able to successfully do in the past. And so there's so many elements and complexities to this specific use case, because they were not only invested in their employees and creating that learning culture internally, but also opening it up to their customers and enabling their customers to have a learning path and a growth with the product and the organization as well. I'm trying to think. There was, I think we worked with their learning education managers, and what they said is, like, the best thing about this was super simple to easy. It integrates with our business tools. We were able to have single sign-on, so our folks log in and then they can just access all of their business tools. They didn't have to go to different screens. They didn't have to do different things, and they can access the training on their time, which for some people who are really invested in learning, the ability to do your training maybe instead of watching some Netflix or whatever your choices are, was really important to them in their culture. So
great. Well, 3 great examples, different, specific. I think it's great. We've got a couple more questions. I'll encourage anybody to ask any other questions. We'll come back to. Let's just wrap up with some questions, and then some takeaways. We can cover those at a high level and then get back to the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of went back and thought, if I was just now creating a business case for a learning solution, what would I try to be thinking about so that I could tie it into the business, like I said. And so how does learning contribute to our business goals? So what is our strategic goal, or what are the outcomes that we're driving through the business, and how can I tie training into that? Because this really leans into our ability to understand the organization, the initiatives, tie it directly to business objectives. And I find that when you can tie it directly to business objectives, increase revenue, cost savings, improve CSAT, whatever that might be, you have a higher success rate of getting buy-in in the business. One of the other ones is, how can we measure impact of learning on KPIs? What I like to do is look at the KPIs in the business and say, are there any things that we can pull in that are important? So reduce turnover, increase productivity, higher sales, even product quality. If there's a different type of training, like where can I look at the KPIs within the business that exists today and tie learning initiatives to that? So I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm not introducing something completely new. I'm tying it into our objectives and how we're measuring in the business today. And I think those are critical things to think about when you're doing this. And then, what do we measure when we put these things in place, and how do we show our success? I've actually, on the next slide, I've pulled in some of the KPIs that I've used to measure and some definitions, because I think everybody thinks about it a little different. I wanted you guys to have some options on it. But when you're putting the business plan together, you need to be thinking about, what can I measure? Is it effectiveness of content? If it's soft skills, does it tie specifically to some type of metric that exists in the business? And then, how can we continuously improve learning initiatives to maximize the business? So when we're thinking about this as leaders, we're generally thinking about what we're trying to do right now, but we're also thinking about the scale and the growth of that. And so how do we pick up efficiencies long-term and things like that? And showing that this initiative grows with you, and that, there's a way to get super effective with your delivery methods. It's easy to help with change management and some of the things going on in the business. Those are some of the ways that you can tie it into growth. And so these are kind of, if I had to say, these are my foundations. This is where I start. And then if you wanted to go to the next slide, I've just put some of the measurements that we have for measuring learning. Not all of these apply to every single situation. As a leader, as a learning, focused initiative, you have to think about the things that are most important to you and apply them where you can. You can't always apply skill application if it's a very soft skill oriented or gray area. And time to competency, if you have a defined level of competency, then you can measure time to competency. So you really have to take these and figure out how they apply to your specific learning situation and your business. But here's some of the ones that I thought could move around and are the most fluid across a couple different use cases.
Yeah, I think this is a good reference, and everybody will get the deck to be able to take a look at that. Let's go back to some questions now. And I think maybe the first one is, because it kind of ties in what you were just talking about, is what advice do you have for measuring soft skills? So not things like revenue or retention, but how do you demonstrate ROI, for instance, or ROE for leadership or professional skills?
Yeah, soft skills it's a really good example. So for soft skills, I try to break it down into specific functions. So if the conversation type that I want, or the communication style, is regarding, strategy, vision, or soft sell growth, negotiation, things like that, I have to take that soft skill and kind of break it down a little bit into the function, and then tie that function to an outcome. So for a strategic conversation, let's see, if you have an account manager or a success manager, you want that person to be having opportunistic conversations with their customers, capturing opportunity potential or growth goals within the business and things like that. And so you can tie that a little bit by the data that's captured back out of those conversations. In, say, a contact center agent, you're looking at the handle time and how they're working with the customer. If the tools are right and the communication on par, there should be the ability to have the effective conversation. And so again, it's really tying it into the specific functions and then taking the ROI from, the efficiency is gained or the operational efficiencies and tying that all together to say, okay, we've taken our agents in 30 minutes a day, they're going to go take this course and this is their benchmark prior to it. And then this is where we see performance and it's either going to go up or down. Now, there's always a conversation to say that specific training may not influence it immediately. It may do it over time, but that's where you really have to lean into your experts and what you're trying to train on,
Yeah.
what you measure it by, and bring all that together.
And I think the same principles apply for things like leadership, right? Because you're not generally just saying, okay, here's leadership training, but specifically, what skills do you want to develop for the leader? And so you look at those things. Is it coaching performance? Is it helping with career development? Those types of things. So you break down your leadership goals for your training and figure out what those are and take a look at them. One thing that I think is not used often enough, especially with leadership training, is asking some questions of the direct reports of the leaders about how they rate a leader on particular things, and both quantitative and qualitative. And then have the training, have them work with their team a little bit, and then ask them another set of, basically the same set of questions, or what's changed? What changes have you observed as being different and better for this leader? So some of it is qualitative like that. I think the other thing you can do is take specific goals. So talent retention, right, is directly tied to leadership. So
Absolutely.
you can look at talent retention overall, but then you can look at the talent retention for, and I'm just using this as one example, there are others. You can also look at each individual leader and their team and how is their talent retention changed? Is it the same? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? So there's a lot of different ways you can measure it. And I think what people get hung up on is they're looking for like direct results, and sometimes those are possible with statistical results, but they're also, again, correlations, right? Is the team working better together? Do customers notice a difference? Now, you may not be able to tie those behavior changes of the team directly to the learning, but if you look at what they were before and what they are now, then the training had some impact. Now, you can't always pinpoint what the impact is. So there are some limitations. But I think what I see a lot is because people can't pinpoint it and give a specific statistic, then they just don't try to do anything. And getting something and getting some indication of whether something's having impact, even on soft skills like leadership, is still important, because you don't have to be perfect with it. You don't have to say, oh, everything's improved by 50% to show that it was impactful. If you're seeing some movement in goals that you've set for yourself or for your leaders in this case, then it's still valuable to measure that and take a good look at it.
It is. And I think specifically with leadership, you have to use a combination of a couple different things there, because you're wanting to gather qualitative from the teams that they're leading. You're wanting to measure effectiveness, and some things you can measure based on metrics, but you can't look at one thing. You have to look at all of it together, and combine that when you're leaning into things like that. I think that's really important. It's a great question.
Yeah, great question. Well, thank you all very much. We're almost out of time. I don't see any other. I think we've handled most of the big questions. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day and being so attentive and involved and asking so many good questions along the way. We really appreciate it. And of course, especially thanks to Litmos and Jen for your work on this webinar and all your great examples and advice. You're a great partner. Thank you for everything you've done today. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we hopefully will see you in a Brandon Hall Group webinar again very soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.